I'm 6 months old now at Nelson Mandela University, and having previously experienced 4 other universities, both as a student and also as a staff member. And during my visit this time, I've observed a distinct character, unique to each institution, and perhaps embedded in the hidden curriculum. And here at NMU, I have observed a sense of pride reflected in the dressing of individuals, some donning hats and proudly dressing in the traditional attire. And it was just an observation, and those of us who are Chiscoped, we are also proudly Chiscoped. So I can, without a doubt, know that there's so many, the discourse of decolonization is happening in different ways. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to invite our first speaker, Molifi from the Public Law. He's going to present on transformative constitutionalism as a gateway to Africanization and decolonization in higher education. So you have 15 minutes. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, colleagues. See some familiar faces. Good morning, Mr. Tando. Happy belated New Year. I know we have not seen each other this year. I need to make perhaps one acknowledgement or admission to say that I'm really not an expert on decolonization, but of course, if you are a legal scholar and then you happen to study constitutionalism, whether you consider yourself an expert or not, there are some certain, philosophical questions which are gonna cross your mind, and then you wonder, as much as you at some point teach students, on law, on South African law, you do still hold, certain philosophical ideologies. It's like a judge with certain backgrounds. He or she is forced to apply the law in a particular way, but they still have their own background, which are informed by religion or belief or culture, you name it. Which is why even in the Constitution, the Constitution enshrines the independence of the judiciary. Just hold that thought. In any case, that's not why we're here today. Today, I just want to say, as much as based on the acknowledgement that I've made, that I'm not an expert on decolonization, it is, however, important to ponder upon the issue of whether transformative constitutionalism, it is indeed a gateway to Africanization and decolonization. Because back in 1998, a scholar by the name of Carl Clay, came up with the notion of transformative constitutionalism. You have a choice as opposed to carry on and see, okay, do you term it, do you call it a doctrine or do you call it a notion? Because it has been applied by the courts in a number of cases, and it's also been interpreted in varying degrees by scholars. The likes of Kibet and Fombard and the likes of Van Niekerk and the likes of Van Mahler have discussed it to certain degrees. So early on in the mid-90s, there was an effort to decolonize the 4-year LLB degree in order to, the aim was massification and democratization of the curriculum in order to increase the number of students who would be taking up the course at university. So, so basically that was the aim. And then the realization was that in the new democratic dispensation, the mid-90s was more or less the new democratic dispensation. Some may argue it still is the new democratic dispensation, but there were issues that were emanating from the past. So the injustices that were committed in the past, which is why later on, around 2015, we've seen escalating protests at universities across the country. The fees must fall, the roads must fall. Oh, okay. I hope I'm able to, after this, yeah. Yeah, so the Afrikaans must fall, and just yesterday, we saw students gathering on this very campus, advocating for accommodation, for decent accommodation for students. So since 2015, more or less, or arguably so, there's been a couple of protests in universities across the country. And however one, looks at it, these issues have to do with the bread and butter issues of the country. They speak to the human condition. There are the issues that are bedeviling the black majority in the country. So that's the issue. And to this extent, the preamble of the Constitution speaks about healing the divisions of the past and establishing a society that is based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. And it also speaks to laying the foundations for a democratic and an open society in which government is based on the will of the people and every citizen is equally protected by law. So I won't go through all of it. So I just basically copied and pasted the preamble to the Constitution. But this is the definition of transformative constitutionalism that I spoke of, but that was advanced firstly by Carl Ley early on in 1998. And the scholar basically defines transformative constitutionalism as a long-term project of constitutional enactment, interpretation, and enforcement committed to transforming a country's political and social institutions and power relations in a democratic, participatory, and egalitarian direction. So the scholar goes on to say that transformative constitutionalism connotes an enterprise of inducing large-scale change through non-violent political processes that are grounded in law. And in this idea is an idea of a highly egalitarian, caring, multicultural community that is governed through participatory democratic processes in both the polity and large portions of what we now call the private sphere. So that is the the definition of transformative constitutionalism that is advanced by Carl Ley. The former Chief Justice Pius Langa also wrote on the the doctrine of transformative constitutionalism, and he opined that it now forms a much greater part of the curriculum, and the vast majority of courses on traditional private or commercial areas devote sections to the impact of the Constitution on that field of law. So he, however, cautions that we must be careful that the influence of the Constitution does not become another set of cast in stone legal principles. So he emphasizes the need to change your mindset. So not only is transformative constitutionalism about a change to legal education, it is also a change in mindset. And then Kibet and Formbad, I alluded to them earlier, they caution, they basically critique the traditional view of transformative constitutionalism, and they add that it does not meet the peculiar needs of transitional societies. So let's be honest, look, numerically speaking, so South Africa has been in this, what we call the new democratic dispensation. The facts on the ground, they speak to a new democratic dispensation. Why do I say so? I say so because the inequalities still persist. The economic inequalities still persist. Poverty still persists. Rural areas remain largely marginalized from the rest of the country. So that is why I say, qualitatively speaking, one can argue that the situation is very much still the same. But numerically, of course, 30 years have since passed. So one can argue that we can no longer describe ourselves as a new democratic dispensation. So as a citizen, you can decide which one you pick. Do you choose to go with the numerical description of the new democratic dispensation, or do you say, no, 30 years has passed, we should expect more of ourselves? And I'll leave that to you. But basically, to just summarize what the paper seeks to do, it challenges the extent to which indigenous knowledge systems and legal structures have contributed to the evolution of constitutionalism in South Africa. The approach that are followed by the courts in South Africa is that whenever an issue arises in the courts regarding the interpretation of a cultural norm or value, it is interpreted in line with common law. But Rautenbach, I think, is a scholar, I believe, from the Northwest University. He cautioned that, common law, as it evolved in South Africa, the way it was applied in South Africa, it was such that it led to the marginalization of customary law. So the courts, what they do is then they say a customary norm, value, or system, it must be interpreted in line with the Constitution and also in line with the principle of constitutional supremacy. But if you look at the historical foundations of South Africa's constitutional supremacy, you will realize that South African law is mainly made up of Roman Dutch law and English law. So now my question is, if you say customary law must be interpreted with the common law, are you not saying that the very customary law that you say is an independent source of law in the Constitution, are you not subverting it and putting it, so if you are to put it in order of priority, are you not saying that the common law comes first and then customary law comes second, in as much as both are recognized as independent sources of law? So for me, that is my question. And then, because let me illustrate this. The president's powers to appoint a cabinet member, those are a relic of the past English law. So they were applied by the Constitutional Court firstly. The president's powers to grant a pardon was applied by the Constitutional Court in Hugo and what's the other one? Chonko case, you name it. So these are relics of English law. But the Constitutional Court has decided to say they must be subject to the Bill of Rights, to the Constitution. So I argue that for meaningful transformative constitutionalism to take place, we must re-look at the historical foundations of South African law, and then only then can we move forward with transforming or with engaging in a meaningful process of transformative constitutionalism. Even though I must add also that the notion of constitutionalism itself has got different meanings, but even when you look at the meanings of constitutionalism, of which has evolved also the principles of the rule of law and legality, all the leading authors, none of them are from Africa. John Locke, all of them, they are not from Africa. So my question is, a member of the Mpondo clan in Kwebeni, what is the rule of law to them? What is the separation of powers to a Morolong in the Northwest? Thank you. So what is the meaning of the principle of legality to a Mokhata living in Rustenburg? So those are the conversations that I argue that we need to have. So with that, I'm just going to summarize and then thank you for listening.
Thank you, Molifi, for the insights on law. Our next speaker is Jasmine from Business Management. She's going to talk about reconceptualizing the financial planning curriculum. Over to you, madam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Right, let me just get my presentation out. Right, I'm a bit nervous because podiums make me nervous. It creates a sort of barrier, But nonetheless, as mentioned, my name is Dr. Jasmine Kinsman. I'm from the Faculty of Business and Economic Sciences, specifically Business Management. And I teach and coordinate the BCom Financial Planning Program, right? And that is the basis of what I'm going to be discussing today. So 2019, I started doing my PhD, although I've been with the institution for almost 10 years, actually more than 10 years. And I've been teaching on this program I have the qualification. I've got the postgraduate qualification in financial planning as well. And then I taught on the program, and I grappled with the fact that I'm teaching something that I don't necessarily believe in, that I don't necessarily always relate to. And it's very difficult teaching something that you can't relate to, because you have to make it relatable to your students, not so? So when it comes to financial planning, it is a professional qualification. It is registered with the Financial Planning Institute, which is our professional body. It also meets regulatory requirements with the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. So there's a lot of regulatory issues or regulatory requirements when it comes to this particular qualification. It's also one of the steps to getting to your CFP designation, Certified Financial Planner, just like a chartered accountant would take their steps, right? So again, a lot of regulations. But this particular profession is so important in our context. It's so important for South African consumers. It's so important for, in particular, for Black South African consumers, because we suffer from a lot of ill fates. We've got a particular history of apartheid, financial exclusion, a poor savings culture, low levels of financial literacy. And this is sort of one of the means of, one of the methods of actually getting that financial inclusion that's needed, right? Another issue with financial planning is the fact that there isn't really a theoretical framework for financial planning. So financial planning draws from theories of economics, from finance, from investments, from law as well, because it operates within the legal framework. So it doesn't really have its own theoretical framework, so to speak. Just to give you a brief overview of what are the actual subjects that are covered in the financial planning program. I mean, briefly, you can have a look and see it. First year, second year, it's quite intensive. The ones that are in yellow are the ones that are offered by my department. I've taught almost all of them, so I can at least speak to, the entire program as a whole. And you'll see that it's issues of personal financial planning, risk management, investment management, estate planning, retirement planning, tax planning, very specialist fields as well. So very difficult to sort of change it if you wanted to. Now, if we look at financial planning, and as I mentioned, we don't really have a framework, but what guides financial planning? We've got one common process, which is called the 6-step financial planning process in South Africa. This is a globally applied process. So financial planning and the designation of CFP is a globally recognized designation. We obviously follow the standards of the Financial Planning Standards Board, also a global standard setting body. And they sort of dictate that all financial planners, in order to get the CFP designation, you have to follow this process. And this is a very generic process. Obviously, first you establish a relationship with the client, then you collect the information, you analyze that information, you make recommendations, you implement, and you review and you monitor. Now, you can't, for me, I argue, and this is what I actually did my PhD on, you can't necessarily take this one-size-fits-all approach and apply it to a context such as South Africa. Because as I mentioned, we're one of the most diverse countries in the world. We've got 11 official languages, 4 main population groups, and even within those 4 main population groups, we've got subcultures, different religions, so we've got unique needs as a result of those different cultural differences, and that obviously influences how we perceive money, not so? It influences our attitudes towards money, our beliefs when it comes to money, right? As I mentioned, we've got a history of apartheid, financial exclusion, poor financial literacy, wealth inequality in our country as well. So a one-size-fits-all approach is not necessarily going to work. So what I did is I did my PhD, graduated last year, and I looked at reconceptualizing this particular process. A little bit of a side note, I actually had to change it from Africanizing to reconceptualizing in order to get it through ethical clearance. So that's also one of those things that sort of needs to start Africanizing and decolonizing, for us to start talking about these things. So if we look at the appropriateness of this process, and this process is integrated into all of the modules in the financial planning curriculum. It's also integrated into the Financial Planning Institute's competency requirements. It says that in order for you to be a financial planner, you must be competent in these particular fields. So that is why it is so important to actually look at this process. So how do we establish relationships of trust? How do we establish relationships with each other in a South African context? Right? There's so many different things that influences it. Firstly, there is an assumption that we are going to go to a financial planner, which is not necessarily the case. There's something called similarity attraction. Does anybody know what that means? Well, essentially, it just means that people who share similar characteristics will sort of flock together. You see it when you enter a room. You will see, if you see another lady that you don't know, you'll go to them. If you see, okay, there's another black person, I'll go there. Another color, I'll go there. So people from the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, they will flock together. If there's certain similarities that, that draw people to one another, that makes them feel that they are a lot more relatable. Somebody who's from the same tribe, per se, right? Same university, there's certain things that are similar that will attract you towards that person, right? Gender and age and racial biases also affects how we establish relationships. So in my studies, we collected information from both financial planners as well as black decision makers. And for my purposes, black refers to, as according to the Employment Equity Act, as black, African, colored, Asian, Indian, right? And as I mentioned, the similarity attraction, you will find that a lot of individuals actually said that they prefer to have a white financial planner. Is that something that is surprising to anyone? Let's be honest. A lot of black consumers said that they prefer to have a white financial planner. Now, how do we prepare? Now, this is the issue that I sit with. How do we prepare our students to be financial planners? And this is what they will be faced with, right? It's the reality, right? Males don't want to receive financial advice from females. They don't want to receive financial advice from someone who might be more educated than them, but younger than them. They don't want to receive advice from someone who's younger than them. These are the realities that is not necessarily reflected in the curriculum, but should be brought in to prepare our graduates and our students, right? Patriarchy plays a huge role. Patriarchy has an impact, obviously, obviously gender included, but the way that decisions are made in a household. Not all decisions are made jointly. There's a male that takes, certain cultures where males are more dominant and they are the ones that make the decisions. There's other homes where it's the female that makes the decisions. Some homes, in fact, we don't even have nuclear households. We have children-headed households. We have grandparents that head households. We've got multiple income earners in one household. We've got intergenerational individuals in one household, and those are things that are not reflected and taken into account in our curriculum. Cultural intelligence also plays a huge role, which basically refers to having some sort of awareness and understanding of someone else's culture, and as well as yours, and the impact that your certain notions about your own culture has on someone else. A small example, again talking about building relationships, one of the participants mentioned that she put her hand out to greet a Muslim man, and he took his hand away. Now, if you don't understand the culture, you will be easily offended. But what you need to understand is that, especially it was on a Friday, it was a very holy day. Prayers happen on a Friday. So they feel in the Muslim culture, it's a sort of impure to touch another woman who's not your wife, right? So you need to have that sort of understanding, and those are things that are not integrated into our culture, into our curriculum. Other aspects that actually influences what our needs are. Again, I said that we have to establish relationship and collect information about the needs, but what are our needs? We have very different needs, unique needs, and our needs might be the same as everyone else, but it takes place in a very different context. Our marital regimes and customary law and Sharia law, those are like things that are unique to South Africa. And those things create a lot of implications at marriage, death, and divorce. That's the main three things that creates financial implication. If you talk about succession planning, if you talk about estate planning, if what happens to your estate when you pass away, it's very different. We've got, as my colleague mentioned, we've got laws that are based on common law. We've got our administration of estate Administration of Estates Act, we've got the Estate Duty Act, we've got the Intestate Succession Act. These are all acts that dictate how someone's deceased estate must be administered. But it doesn't take into account the fact that you've got your traditional, your traditional, 5 minutes, your traditional community leaders sometimes take up the role of distributing a deceased estate. In Islamic succession, it's very different because you have where the males get priority over females, right? Which is in contradiction to what, as mentioned, which is not what is mentioned in the Estate Duty or Administration of Estate Duty Act. So there's a lot of conflicting things from a cultural perspective that, is not consistent with the laws and legislation, and how obviously you're going to implement that and give advice to someone. These are some of the things, again, that was very unique. Family homes, right? A family home I found to be something to be such a sore point. In some cultures, it is easy to get rid of your parents' home because it causes unnecessary expenses and there's wills in place and so forth. But more often than not, you will find that there hasn't been provision put in place. We don't want to talk about finances. We don't want to talk about death, which means now we have a family home that is sitting there. And from a financial perspective, that doesn't make financial sense. But do you know that family home is that place that you go back to if things don't work out with your husband? That family home is where you do, from an African perspective, there's a lot of, sorry, my words are escaping me because I want to talk this. Rituals, rituals, rites and customs and things that happen at the family home. Your elders are often, and ancestors are often buried at the family home. So for you as a financial planner to say, get rid of your family home because it causes unnecessary financial implications, is what I'm saying. Those are the sort of things that needs to be taken into account. Property, wealth, land, that is a big issue amongst us. And if you look at the history of the fact that we weren't allowed to actually acquire homes, property. In some cultures, you had the Nduna that was handing out, in the Zulu culture, handing out, property. You have council houses, which is common amongst the colored community. Like, we have our relationship with these things are very different. And all I'm saying is that these are things that needs to be taken into account when you want to say that you want to have a financial planning curriculum, not only the formal qualification, but if you look at the fact that from a professional perspective, can you really say that you are competent as a financial planner if you aren't aware of some of these things? I'm currently did a study with my master's student on zakat literacy. That is something that is unique to Muslim individuals, which is a payment that they have to pay according to Sharia law. The results were shocking how many financial planners aren't aware of it, which means how can that financial planner give financial advice to a Muslim consumer who has a very unique, set of facts because of Sharia law? But how can you say you are competent in a South African context, right, to give financial advice? That is just some of the many, many findings trying to condense my PhD. But I'm hoping for change. I think I'm raising more questions and then answers. But I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jasmine, for the insights and sharing your research in some of the issues and how they can be incorporated in the curriculum. Our third speaker, Ayanda, she's going to talk about creating indigenous knowledge based on some sexual concepts. Over to you, madam.
Thank you very much to our MC. Let me just hope that my thing is on. That's not mine. Thank you. Thank you. Then I'm there. All right. It's going to be a free-flow engagement after listening to lawyers and financial planners, and I delve directly into the teaching of science, particularly the conceived sexually taboo concepts. So please flow with me. And I'm going to put a disclaimer as I said that please, if your culture offends you against naming the sexual parts is done in the curriculum, please forgive me because I need to put this as it is. This presentation is a continuation of my study of a PhD. There is a paper that has been accepted on this, and on the next journey, as you can see the heading, we're trying to have a repository of Xhosa, English, and other vernaculars, and Afrikaans, of course, of terms that are acceptable in terms of the taboos versus terms in sexuality that are existing, but due to decolonization of the mind, I won't go to the causes, perhaps it's Christianity, but I will trace the culture that I am familiar with. As you look at me, you see I'm a Xhosa girl, I'm a villager. You can see from the way that I'm dressing, I'm like that. So, I'll just go quickly that my study, you can see it starts at the ground because as cultural people, we like to base our discussions on the views of the main population. In this case, is the indigenous people of South Africa and particularly in the Eastern Cape. I went on to find out what is the problem. I will skip the others because they're clear. My thinking was that there's a challenge which I saw in the classroom when I am teaching. I'm teaching Bachelor of Education students across the phases and the postgraduate students in the Faculty of Education with the history of teaching in predominantly black and town schools. And the study was done in the rural Engcobo area with mainly isiXhosa speaking and culturally similar background of teachers and learners, where we found out that when the curriculum in grade 12, I will look at the exit in grade 12 life sciences, requires those teachers to be explicit in terms of teaching the human reproductive system, then the problems come in. I will cite just one example before I come to the issue of the euphemisms, the metonymies which are challenging because they confuse the child or the student or the learner in the classroom. The challenge is that when you are, let me make an example about fertilization, the process of fertilization and sexual intercourse or copulation. Those teachers that were in the study said that we don't teach that because these learners laugh. When it comes to menstruation, the menstrual cycle, they don't teach that. Remember, it is examinable, so the learners will go to read about it. Why is it that we prefer, as the indigenous people, like now I'm coming to us, the various indigenous populations of Africa, to shy away from existing lexicon? It's not that these concepts are abstractions. They are there. I'm going to cite one example, and those who know Xhosa will come with me. Before you can go to copulation and fertilization, you must be talking about a penis, that is English. We have a vernacular in Xhosa for a penis, which is umthondo. But the moment you say that term, you're too vulgar. Who said what too vulgar? It's the colonization of the mind that what I am going to say, which is the common and acceptable term for the particular concept, then I feel that it doesn't agree with the general modern view. So we come in with these substitute terms, and these substitute terms, all of them, the taboos, these euphemisms that we use for a penis, we say a penis is a kettle, iketile. A kettle is used for boiling water. Then now take a girl. A girl has got a vagina, but you are running away from saying it bends, because you must be explaining. In classes, we do code switching to make this clear. But the moment you go to Sisi, Sisi is like a young girl, a cake, a keke. Remember South Africa, we are a country that is so much into gender-based violence. Imagine this young girl at school who has been touched, violated, goes to report, then says, my cake or unosisi, what is that? Because that learner doesn't know the real name of this. Imagine the doctors that were producing, who are having clients coming into their consulting rooms. The problem is the infection down around the vagina. But because of cultural taboos, they cannot say so. Then this doctor, who may not be speaking English, even if speaking English, remember, our students now are coming from former model schools, so they don't know those things. Then we're saying, the mother comes in, I'm saying a waist is this area, because the pain is around the stomach area. The mother or the female cannot be saying, I'm having it. The problem is down there in the vagina, but cannot say it. So it's a challenge that I put forward to say, as scholars who are doing science, particularly those who are coming from the various indigenous populations, we need to have a repository, a sexual concepts repository, where we say, if it's a penis, the acceptable term is umtondo, then these are the euphemisms that you use for that. I won't even go to menstruation, because menstruation is one confusion where people will say in my language, it is ukuhlamba. Ukuhlamba is to wash. How do you say menstruation is washing? And then you get the slang of ezigemeni. So we need a central repository where even a person coming from another culture, from another language, can consult, and in the next paper, I'll be consulting people who are specializing in languages. I'm looking at you, Professor Nomalanga, because I am not an expert so much into languages, because now we need to construct an electronic repository, take these terms and put them on. And in my classes, when I do my science, it's diverse, it does happen. And the history that I'm tracing here is that I love reading the traditional Xhosa books. The history of Unongawuse, I won't go into detail about that. Many people know about it. But on the history of Unongawuse, I am tracing the parts where the decolonization needs to happen to us, because colonization took place. In the fact that we were differentiated as a culture into the Reds, Amakaba, and the modern people. As a result, our culture in the process became subsumed by the conception of being modern, by running away from teaching this current generation, which is going to represent our future generation of parents and also leaders. Are we not killing our language and our culture? Because it means that they will not know. And then, as Xhosa people, we also have teachings, cultural practices on menstruation. I've done a lot on that. I won't go to that one. I will leave it today. It was led by women. And the argument is there that we need a change. Science is so rigid. I won't repeat what other speakers have said. It's Eurocentric. But before you go to the abstractions, bring the real world of the learner. And I'm teaching a diverse classroom. You can imagine in my class, I never have less than 90%, because their stories interest me. An Afrikaans boy, I'll make this, I was teaching technology. I'm not only into sexuality, teaching technology in science. When I related how we use those hard ions that we put on the fire, he was so interested. He sent me a message at midnight. I saw it the next day. He went home to the pantry where grandma was keeping old things and came with a Victorian iron, which was opened. And I said, yay, I never knew that this had relevance in science. So culture has got a unifying factor. And as I'm about to close off, I'm also looking at Fortunate. This study, since it is cultural, is grounded on mainly African theorists. I'm using here Oguni, the contiguity argumentation of Oguni. He's in science, arguing that for people to reach consensus, they need to have an intra-argumentation. You start by talking within yourself, you have a mind change, then you go to the next person. As Africans, through the spirit of Ubuntu and CAT, we need that. And then I use the critically participatory mode of methodology. The second one, the second philosophy that I use is the one which talks about the theoretical framework for the philosophical canons of African indigenous education. We are a nation which is supposed and also grounded historically that what happens today, we have a formal prerogative that we teach the next generation. So if the next generation does not know, for example, that to menstruate is to be exesheni, to be on time, exesheni, or to be engeni, which is cultural, but knows egemini, robots, where will our culture be? Because they are slanging it, and there is no background. They're slanging it. Now, to really show that this thing of being taboo is ingrained, I took one of the open-ended questionnaires that I developed in the study. It came out that the teachers say, we don't talk about these things. We cannot name asibizi. And they say that this is not allowed in our culture. Who said so? Because they've been groomed that to be modern, keep up with the modern thing. Then does modernism not destroy our culture and our roots and what we will send off to the next generation? We need to preserve our cultural heritage as the indigenous people. And then this repository, I called it intentionally as isiXhosa uvimba. Uvimba like a reserve, a storage. So I am agitating that we need a sexual concepts repository consisting of these culturally appropriate concepts for teaching menstrual cycle and also other sexual concepts, matched against the existing lexicon, which is in the vernacular, various vernacular. Then as I land off, when we look at the philosophical canons for indigenous education and CAT, I put up that rondavel, which is traditionally, I took a photograph when I was doing my own fieldwork, when I was going to Transkei. It's still there, and in my home, we still have those. When we look at our rich cultural heritage, are we pleased that we see that it is becoming extinct? It is dying. It is being subsumed by what is deemed as modern. And we have political dispossession because we have lost control of our own culture. How will the next generation then know the real culturally derived terms for sexual organs if we keep on using euphemisms and confusing metonymies? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think there's so much to talk about when it comes to issue of sexual concepts. I think you needed more time, but thank you for keeping the time. So, ladies and gentlemen, these were very intriguing discussions. Financial planning, issues of law, then issues of sexual concepts. I'm sure there are questions. If there are any questions, we'll take the questions straight away. We can go with 3 per round. I think there's a microphone somewhere. Yes, the first one over there. If there's anyone, you can just show by raising your hand. Second one here, and third one there.
Thank you so much. I wanted to say this was such an amazing panel. How insightful. I feel like I've learned so much, especially the combination of the three. It's like they somewhere somehow spoke to each other. So before the chair cut me off, this issue of indigenous law, I'm a historian, and I wonder how much actual work is done by lawyers to look at how Africans have created law that can be helpful. I mean, I can say something to you later about immigration and the way Ukumkanu Hinza dealt with the issue of Mfengu immigration in the Eastern Cape and how it could be informing an African perspective on immigration during our current crises globally. Your presentation was fantastic. I will admit I have a white financial planner, but by accident, he was referred to me by other black women because he understood that if he said to me as a black woman, I know as a black woman you are burdened, come let me help you save. And that gay white man actually went to school here at UPE in the 60s, but he knew that cultural intelligence and that I would go to him. And I've been with him for 15 years. So I'd like you to say more about how we can make more black financial planners who don't try and make me as a black person into a white person. Because the problem I have with black financial planners, they think I want to be like Van Wyk. I don't want to be. But Van Wyk, my financial planner, knows that Nomalanga has got rituals and things to do, and that's why I go to him now. And then, Doc, I just wanted to say fantastic. There is a song by Izangoma, not Osley Togoza Bangoku, Izangoma Zamanyane eti lom tondu dalinyaganyaka. And the point I want to make is our languages are strong, but I think we must be clear that some of our languages were affected by missionaries. Because what is this Kafir savage talking about? So I just wanted to say there is a lot, and I wonder in your work how we can bring, because there is also inhlonipho. I don't think my students want to hear me say umtondo. They don't want to hear me say that. So how do we find both the word and the respectable language? As if a black doctor meets an older man, I can't do that.
Okay, thank you.
Also,
Second. Yeah, you can go for it.
Thank you, Doc. My question is on the second speaker, Miss Jasmine Kinsman from Business Management. Okay. I wrote it down here so I won't forget. Financial planning is almost a foreign concept when it comes to your apartheid design townships. And having a financial planner is almost mostly associated with first whiteness and the rich. And it is quite easy for students to leave the university with that perspective. That I am a financial planner and I want to start my business and office, whatever, in Summerstrand instead of Ezwide. Is this idea of financial planning or its curriculum cognizant of such? And if, how do we extend financial planning to these marginal townships and also understanding of such? And I think the last question would be, does the financial planning curricula have any social purpose, responding to South Africa's social challenges as well, and apartheid histories, colonial histories, and so on and so forth? Thank you.
Thank you. They are loaded. You should start preparing.
Can I stand now? Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity which you just given to me. I don't have much to talk about, but I found this very intriguing to the House. It evoked a lot of, I can say, debates. My question is based on the speaker, the Latin speaker, what he said. But firstly, I want to concede with his sentimental, I can say, rebuttals or contentions, arguments, by saying that the IKS, indigenous knowledge system, languages, particularly in South Africa, the context of South Africa, they are not considered. They are not utilized or deployed in teaching and learning pedagogies. That is the most crucial thing to talk about. This thing lies from the systematical disparities and inequalities the legacy of apartheid and stuff like that. But I just want to engage what you said, madam, by saying modernization is what actually make these languages to be shy away from the teaching and learning. I don't actually agree to that based on this, I can say reasons, because each and every culture, given its normative values and morals and morass, it has authority to, I can say, to teach young ones, or to, I can say, to make those practices, I can say, compliant. It's not about modernity. Modernity is a different concept. It doesn't come to us to say, when you want to call your private party, you should call it in this way. I think it's culture. We've got this thing called honorifics. People who do language here, I think they can actually rectify honorifics. You don't need to call this thing the way it is. But you're right, because we need to get rid of that misconception. We need to call them the way they are, and so people can understand the issue of gender-based violence, teenage pregnancy. People, they must know the biological science. When you put 1 by 2, 1 plus 1 is 2. You know, the sperm and this, you have a baby at the end of the day. So this is what actually the problem lies. Just to save time quickly as possible, my question is just based on that. Oh, before going to my question, I think taboo itself, because you raised a very profound question by saying who actually, manifested, co-founded the taboo. It's part of our cultural things and stuff like that. I think it's just a distinction between the Westernization culture and also Africanization culture. So, as a young scholar, I think we need to have inclusive approach. We need to amalgamate those two concepts. We don't need to say these things are not good for us. What about people who say, no, I'm not Africanist, I'm not Pan-Africanist. I'm just, subscribe to a certain school of thoughts. So by having that holistic approach, will balance all individuals. This is what I can say. The question is, how do you actually respond to a taboo, as I mentioned, when you say that we need to call the names of these private parts the way they are? My question is, Madam Speaker, due to a respect and in this august house, I just want to ask you, how do you respond to the taboo? If the young ones don't call their private parts, because culture is what manifest us, indoctrinate our mindset and shape us. We live with culture, so culture is very important. But the issue of a taboo, how do you respond to that? If teaching and learning pedagogies in higher institutions of learning or public schools will use these words and call them the way they are, it's just my question. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So, you can read the comment from online before we give the presenters a chance to respond.
We have a comment from online. It reads as follows. I would advise Dr. Simai, you move from the known concept. They are there. You can also look at what other Nguni languages call these biological concepts. Then borrow from them to enlarge vocabulary database. That is a comment from Unomako Sazana Hazel Hassan. Should I repeat or? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not going to rephrase the questions. I think you were taking notes. Yeah, so I will give you the chance and be brief so that we can be able to take a second round of questions.
Thank you very much.
You can use the mic.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll first respond to Prof. Nomalanga's input, and spot on. She is confirming that the existence of these terms in the vernacular is there. But the challenge is that we must find space between the acceptable terms. Acceptable means that culturally appropriate terms. But now, have we arrived at that point? Because as we know, culture has got rules and restrictions, and if you do something which is outside the expectations of culture, you become excluded in various ways. Like in this case, you'll be seen as vulgar. Hence, this particular presentation is agitating for a repository which will take the original concept which is there, viewed as taboo, then the English term and the other diverse cultures, then we say, and I'm going to use the culture that I know, which is Xhosa. Can we have a conversation with the linguists? Because I'm not a linguist. I'm a science person coming from Xhosa culture. But the linguists know deeper. How can we use a culturally appropriate term? And then lastly, we have on the extreme the slang that is used by younger people. In so doing, any person who is touching this particular concept, or a doctor in charge of checking a mom or whoever, a female, will know that if we're talking about, for example, a vagina is a keke. If we agree, but we need to have agreement, because if we have these pseudonyms, they are creating a conflict in the mind of the learner, and the learner or the child who has been through a lot will lose out in cases, because maybe my lawyer that side would say, then where was the cake? And the cake is supposed to be eaten, but you have told the learner that the vagina is a cake. I'm making an example. Lastly, the last input, I didn't get the name of the speaker. You have already made a profound contribution to say that the taboos, which I have highlighted. But now, whose taboos? Culture. So we need to cross that barrier, because various scholars in science, they're saying that let us name it by English, which means that English doesn't describe, for example, the difference between like in Xhosa, describe the difference between fertilization and sexual concept. They run away from it. It's there, but they are scared. It says so in the research, of going into detail. So the cultural taboos are good, but can be a barrier, because this generation doesn't know the original terms. So we need to preserve that by have congruent terms that can be understood. I think I have responded. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You can go for yours.
Right, thank you. To address Prof. Ayanda's comment, you are 100% correct. It is a very common thing in the financial planning industry or in the financial planning profession, where you will find that that you will have your older financial planners or your more established financial planners who are actually able to speak to cultural aspects more because they had that experience. And then you'll find that our graduates, our black financial planners, and I think it's just generally where everyone has a sort of an association or an idea of what wealth is, who has wealth. And I think once we start demystifying those things, only then we'll be able to make some progress. For example, if you look at what wealth is, we all have different definitions of wealth, but only certain definitions are considered as wealth. If you look at the census from an economics perspective, and they do a census, they don't consider you to be wealthy if you go to, your hometown and you've got 2 cows and a chicken. They don't consider that to be wealth. I think when you start, because even if you've got an extra back room, that's a rental income potential, but it's not considered as wealth, so to say. Even if you look at and start embracing our indigenous things, our things that we really implemented, because as a result of apartheid, we were excluded from the financial system. So we had to participate in our burial societies for funerals, we had to participate in stokvels, but now all of a sudden it almost seems as if those things aren't considered anymore, but yet it's very lucrative. Even FNB, if you look at a property stokvel, where 20 people can participate in a bond, right? It's called with FNB. So when we start embracing those traditional and indigenous vehicles, and incorporate into what is actually existing, and then we only will be able to address those notions. And then you had a lot of Yes. And I think it's very complicated when you take financial planning into consideration, because you teach financial planning with the intention of helping, showing someone how to give someone advice based on their circumstances. But then when you get out into to industry, you have to operate within a legal framework and then within a business framework where you are remunerated for selling products. You're not remunerated for selling advice. And if you do give advice, the advice is expensive. I mean, good financial planners give good financial advice, but then the fee is 5,000 Rand, 3,000 Rand for that advice. And then they say you can go and implement it with whoever, wherever, or I'll help you with that. So that is, it's inaccessible, you know. So you can't also say get rid of the commission and so forth, because there's a lot of financial planners starting out, especially black financial planners, that is their only source of income. So immediately they will fall into that trap of, okay, I will, you know, you don't have wealth, or I don't perceive you to have wealth because that's not what I grew up with knowing as having wealth. Then immediately they will fall into the trap of, okay, let me rather sell products because this person has a portfolio of so much. So there's a lot of work to be done in the regulatory framework, in the professional space as well. But it's important to also bring these things to the fore, because for me, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of things that are discussed in terms of culture, and it's very easy for me to misrepresent those different things from different cultures because it's not my own. But somebody has to mention it. It has to be represented in some other way. And that also speaks to your comment about the social impact that a financial planner makes. You know, again, we can talk about corporate social responsibility and tick off all the boxes, but until there is a real incentive to really give that advice to the people who really need it, but also to start demystifying and having people understand that financial planning is not just for the wealthy, it's for everyone. When we get to that point, then we can say there's definitely been a social impact that's been made. Hopefully that's addressed the comments or the questions.
Okay. I want to address Prof. Nomalanga. I think she did ask what work has been done by lawyers in the decolonization sphere. I suppose that would translate to perhaps asking, and I hope I do justice to your question, it would translate to asking, what do practicing lawyers do, or, you know, when they are faced with a matter, or whenever a matter arises, and of course there's a need to somehow sneak in, you know, an interpretation that would somewhat favor decolonization. So first of all, I'm not a practicing lawyer, I must admit, but I am a legal scholar. I've been for, I don't know, donkey years. So the thing is, let me answer by way of a practical example. So let's say you've got someone, I gave an example of someone living in Kwebeni. So the power to grant fishing licenses, it lies with the minister. You know, so fishing licenses. And then someone from Kwebeni is obviously a member of the cultural community of the Amampondo living in Kwebeni. And then let's say the person goes ahead in recognition of their own indigenous right to fish in the area. And then obviously they are caught by the police, you know, for violating the existing law regarding fishing, you know, fishing license. So they're obviously fishing without a license. Now the issue is gonna be what law is applicable to the matter. So I'm gonna keep the criminal law aspect out of it. So if the person decides to take the decision to prosecute him to court on the basis that they've got an indigenous right to fish in the area, the applicable law, the starting point is gonna be the Constitution. And the foundations of the Constitution is not gonna be the customary law, it's gonna be common law. And common law is largely made up of Roman Dutch law and English law. Yes, the Constitution recognizes customary law as an independent source of law. But what the courts do is they interpret customary law in line with the Constitution. So they say that that particular person, the claim that they are laying to fishing, to exercising an indigenous right to fish, it must be interpreted with, it must be tested in line with the Constitution. But how do you test an indigenous right against a document, a legal instrument of which the foundation, philosophically speaking, is in doubt, is doubtful? You know, because you are basically saying, you're taking judicial notice of an indigenous right, but then you're saying, you know, what has been now codified into a legal instrument that is known as the Constitution is the one that should be used to validate a prior existing right, whether it existed before the coming into being of the common law right through colonization is in doubt or it's in dispute. But the fact of the matter is we are using Eurocentric approach to adjudication, and even if the member of the Amampondo clan goes on to win the matter, but if a legal scholar like me comes and sits down and say which law was used to adjudicate over the matter, it is going to be a question of English law principles were used, because they're going to, let me tell you now, you know, if I'm a member of an indigenous clan, I am a Botswana, you know, I've got roots in the Northern Cape, the Northwestern Botswana, but if someone like me, as a legal scholar, comes and then, you know, if someone comes and then they say, my right to fish, you know, as an indigenous member of the Amampondo clan in Kwebeni was violated, one of the things that they're going to say is procedural fairness. You know, so procedural fairness, we don't know the nature and origin of it in African customs. You know, in Setswana we say we've got consultation, yes, you know, terisanyo. That is the Setswana word for consultation. We also have a saying that goes, khosi ke khosi ka batho, umtu ngomtu ngabantu. You see? No. Yes. Sorry, my course is Fanagalo. Excuse me, but
yeah, you can wind down.
Yeah. So basically, what I'm trying to say is we rule by consultation. Now, whether we should be using common law principles that are codified in the Constitution to validate an indigenous right, for me, I argue we shouldn't. So I hope I've answered your question. So lawyers are constrained by the mechanical way of interpreting the Constitution, which is the Constitution is the starting clause, legislation, and then you've got regulations and guidelines. Yeah, that's how it's been for, since I suppose since 1961 or since 1901 when the Union of South Africa came into place. I don't know, whichever way.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Any more questions? We can take, we'll go this side. I think we started from here. We'll quickly go and be brief, please, now, because we are only left with about 12 minutes. So let it be a question or a comment.
Dr. Simai, thank you so much for your very informative presentation. I just wanted to know from you, because also, okay. I just wanted to know from you, because you also mentioned the prevalence of gender-based violence in South Africa, and I was just thinking about the unintentional consequences of uhlonipha izinto. I just wanted to find out from you, are you aware of perhaps any court cases that were actually thrown out of court because umuntu mhlawumbe ufike wathi usisi instead, because as we heard as well from the lawyer that words matter, and the language, because lawyers do play with words. So are there any court cases that you are aware of that have been thrown out because of the ukuhlonipha, whereby umuntu angayitsho into ngale ndlela engayo? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Phumelela Gama. My issue is, I raised this earlier in a sense of the fact that we are governed by acts, and we have representative in parliament that are supposed to question these issues. And as citizens, it is incumbent on us to ensure that our representatives are doing the work that is supposed to change these acts, in which, therefore, when we seek advice from financial planners and so forth, they can proceed based on the comfort of what the law is essentially allowing for those processes to continue. And then religion has had an issue of how we interpret our own lives. The taboo-ness aspect and things that we don't talk about this, ends up having a detrimental effect in terms of some of the issues that have been raised, in the sense of being open and being forthright in aspects of discussing issues that are pertinent to our health, as Umama was saying, in terms of teaching those taboo set of terms. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's go this side. I'm hoping that the questions you can combine when you are responding.
Thank you. My name is Tando from the Law Faculty. It's not more of a question directed to but let me cut to the chase. We are busy with this project of decolonizing and Africanizing the curriculum. But my question has always been, the outside society where we practice, is it ready to embrace our graduates? And I'll make an example, Molefi, of a judgment, State versus Damoyi. The magistrate is there. All the parties are proficient in Xhosa. There is no interpreter available. He says it's pragmatic and practical to proceed in Xhosa because the parties to the dispute are proficient in Xhosa. But when the matter was taken on review, the High Court chastised that magistrate. They were not so happy with the approach that is adopted. So the point being now, where is this issue of the Constitution which recognizes that there are official language, and I think Xhosa is one of them. Then the second part, which is going to be a little bit controversial, you've cited that Echwebeni village issue, which is closer to their heart. Those people there, they don't have food, let alone sufficient food and water. And there have been many interventions. The Human Rights Commission has actually gone there to investigate a Chapter 9 institution, but its recommendations were just ignored by the powers that be. And now it cements that sentiment stated by Justice Kolap when he was awarded LLD to say, we may be having this constitution with all these rights, but some people unfortunately seem to be living outside that constitution. And my case in point is, from where I stand, the Echwebeni village people, when you tell them that there's a constitutional right to sufficient food and water, they're starving there. They don't understand what you mean. So my point is to say, we still have a challenge because much as we can embark on this project, how sure are we that the outside world, because we appear before judges, and if you look at that State versus Damoyi matter, you could argue and say, look, maybe the project needs to be taken even to the people who appear before. I don't know whether that makes sense, but I hope it does.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So I think those are our questions. I encourage you to be also brief because I think time is running. We just have 5 minutes only. So I'll give you a chance to respond.
Thank you, colleagues. The first one, the response, I won't address the issue of cases because I'm not in that area. I think the lawyers and the judges and the magistrates will go into that space because I don't want to report on hearsay. But tangible experiences that I can reflect on are based on teachers that I was interviewing who have children who are doctors, and they were saying They were confused. Why are these women? Remember, most of our children, we have sent them to former Model C schools. So their basic or traditional Xhosa is very limited. Some cannot even speak it. So now I was having this problem. Why are all these women in the village suffering from a sore waist? That is the problem when you do not name, because culture, as I was saying in the example, is barring the real meaning of that term, and the limited vocabulary of the particular specialist then throws it off. The last one, you find that another experience by this teacher was saying is a male of Xhosa culture. This particular student apparently has started menstruating in class. So the student cannot get up and talks to the male teacher. Why are you not getting up? Teacher, ndiyahlamba. I mean that teacher, I am menstruating. The male teacher doesn't know menstruating, then why do you have to wash at school like kuhlamba? You may think that it is very little, but remember the area where I was doing this. In the area of the former Transkei, we have various cultures within the Xhosa people. So there is sort of slang and things. So he was, ukuhlamba, what is it? Until now, the girl has to call another girl to explain to the male teacher. The taboo first starts with a female addressing menstrual issues with a black male. It's a taboo at first, so was restricted. So if we leave these matters as they are, we are creating a perpetual problem. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm just going to address Tando's comment about whether or not, from a financial planning perspective, whether or not the industry is ready. I think they are open to it. Whether they are ready is a different question. And the moves have been made towards, sort of trying to access bigger markets, including more markets, including more consumers, especially because those who do have sort of wealth aren't investing in South Africa anymore. So they're investing outside of South Africa because of our political issues and so forth, economic issues and so forth. So they have no other choice but to, especially because 94% of South African consumers is black consumers, black, African, colored, Asian, Indian again. So they definitely are open to it. Whether they know how to go about it is a different question. I think a lot of consumer education is required. A lot of consumer access is also required. Thank you.
Thank you. I will also address Mr. Tando's comment. Just to, the immediate answer is absolutely not. We're not ready for it. I'm not going to say society and exclude myself. We're not ready for it. But the mindset is there. If you speak to someone from the rural of the rural places, if there is such an English, certainly you can hear that this person is proud of where they come from, they are proud about their culture, etc. But now the other comment, which I'll keep it short also, is, we also need to keep in mind when colonization first started. The question that is similar to yours is, were we as Africans are ready to embrace colonization? The answer is absolutely not. It was imposed upon us. Now, bringing it back to modern day Africa, the question is, if decolonization starts, are we ready to embrace decolonization? And the short, so basically the answer then becomes, what is the approach to implement, if it is implementing, what is the approach to implement decolonization? Should it be forced upon people, or should it be more of a persuasive approach? I will leave it to the universe or the winds of change, in my case, God, to decide what is the proper approach.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate your responses to some of the questions which were difficult questions. But unfortunately, I think your question, you raised it earlier on about religion. I think religion is a sensitive issue to some people because I see that it's being avoided. And it's not me. I'm not in the area of religion, unfortunately. Probably I could have attempted, but I'm not going to attempt. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have come to the end of the session. And thank you so much. And join me to give a round of applause to our presenters for a job well done.